mention one thing, and that is I learned a lesson with The Force Awakens. I was convinced with the marketing of The Force Awakens that with the trailers and the photographs and the toys that they held something back. I was convinced that we hadn't seen every location that we were going to see in the movie. I really thought that we were only seeing maybe like a third of the film and maybe a few shots towards the end. I did not think that they were showing us basically all the different parts of the movie throughout the trailers. And I was totally wrong. So I've been watching the Rogue One trailers with that in mind, that more than likely we've seen, I mean, obviously not all of it because we're just seeing trailers, but we've seen all the different locations in the trailers that we are going to see in the film, and that they're really not holding a ton back. So that just is one of those things where it kind of keeps my, expectations in check. So, real quick, just production note, if you hear that humming in the background, this is kind of funny, so quick diversion. The laundry room is right off of my office, in the lower portion of the house. There's like 3 levels to this house, and when the washer, I've never had a washer that did this before. When the washer gets into the spin cycle, the thing sounds like a jet engine. Like, I want to call up Ben Burt, who's the sound designer for the Star Wars movies, or Matt Wood, he's the more recent one. I want to call him up and be like, dude, you got to go buy one of these washers and then record the final spin cycle on it, because the hum, like, I'm halfway convinced every time this thing gets going. I mean, it's behind, you can hear it in the background. It's behind like 2 doors and 3 walls right now. Like, 1 level up from where the laundry room is sort of the main room where my television is. I cannot have the laundry room door open when that thing's on the spin cycle, because it sounds like a Millennium Falcon's going to come crashing through the wall below us. So it's beginning to cycle down right now. Sorry, quick diversion. I could hear it in the background, and I'm on a roll. I didn't feel like stopping the podcast. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't love the audience that much, apparently, right? No, I do. I'm so glad you download the podcast. All right, let's switch gears. A little bit about Han Solo news. And I'm going to be completely and totally honest here. I'm excited over the Han Solo movie now in a way that I wasn't before, and it's solely because Emilia Clarke of Terminator Genesis and Game of Thrones fame has been cast for the movie, and I absolutely adore her. Look, I'll admit Terminator Genesis was not the best Terminator film by any stretch. I do like it, I own it, but I will watch it over and over again just because of Emilia Clarke's portrayal of Sarah Connor in that movie. I love her character in that movie, and I adore her as an actress. So I've mentioned that I'm not really hyped on the Han Solo spin-off film because I don't particularly think we need one. I'll watch it. I'll talk about it. There'll be numerous podcasts about it when it rolls around. However, it's not high up on my list of Star Wars I want to see until now that they've grabbed Game of Thrones star Emilia Clarke from Solo Star Wars story. So I'm excited now. Purchased the Blu-ray, the 3D Collector's Edition Blu-ray, solely because it has the J.J. Abrams commentary on it, and I have not listened to it yet. I started it the other day. I've only had it for a few days. I started it the other day, and I may watch it later this evening, but I just watched The Force Awakens like last weekend, and so not that I can't watch that movie over and over again, but TV time being limited with being in a house with 2 boys who are addicted to the television, I really needed to pick and choose my movie watching time wisely, and there were other things that I wanted to be watching. So I hope that when we get back tonight from seeing Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, that I'll have a chance to sit down and listen to all of J.J. Abrams' commentary. And another reason why I haven't had a chance to, or I haven't bothered to sit down and watch it either, is because I've read a couple of different articles about some of the larger points of what J.J. Abrams talked about, the more important things. That's not to say that I don't want to hear all of it. I do. I love movie commentaries. And the commentaries on all the other films are always spectacular. I hope that we get more commentaries, not just from J.J. Abrams, but also maybe some of the actors and actresses. I mean, I'd love to hear a commentary with Daisy Ridley on The Force Awakens, or John Boyega, or even Adam Driver for that matter. But like I said, the important things that were in the commentary I've read before, so hopefully I'll sit down tonight and have a chance to listen to the commentary. All right, let's go here. Let's talk a bit about locations, and I'm going to roll this into the conversation of our love for Star Wars. I'm not going to get political. I am responding to that, and without talking about politics either way, I am going to respond to what I've heard on other podcasts by talking about my love for Star Wars, and that's just it, because that's what I think the point of these podcasts should be. I will mention something that did frustrate me incredibly outside of the podcast world as it relates to Star Wars, but I'll tie that all into the larger the larger topic of why Star Wars is so great. One of the reasons why, and I've never talked about this because it really is low on my list in terms of fandom for the movies, even though it's obviously crucial to the film, and that is locations. I've never really talked about locations. I know that there are people that, everybody has the things that they love about Star Wars specifically. I've talked about that, the space battles. I like the action. I like the vehicles. I think that's the most appealing part to me, apart from the family story and all that. But the locations of the film and the limitations that George Lucas was under, I don't think it was his intention, but what he ended up doing with the original trilogy, and I actually think, I'll tie this into why I think the prequels also continue to get a bad rap, because I think that the locations in those films has something to do with it. But obviously, George Lucas was limited by technology at the time when he made the original trilogy. And so the planets that he created, and I've never really heard commentary on this, so I'd be curious as to why every planet is sort of indicative to one climate. Hoth being snow, Tatooine being desert, Endor being forest. Be that as it may, that's what he did, which I think is unique to Star Wars, and I do like that. I'd rather have them not go the other way of making like an Earth-like planet with different climates. I'd rather have them stick to planets that all have sort of a single climate, climatology to it. But the one thing that did, and again, I think that if Star Wars were to have been born today and not back in 77, I don't think it would be as special because they have the ability to do so many different things, to go to different locations that don't look like things on Earth. But the fact that they did that in the original trilogy made it even more relatable. And what I mean by that is, Tatooine, if you're a Star Wars fan or it's in your mind, if you're in a desert, there's a natural inclination to make comments about that. Wow, it's hotter than Tatooine. I mean, you can do it with Jakku now, right? Hoth. And this is where this whole idea popped into my head to begin with. And that was, we got the first snowfall here in Minnesota, and I've got Empire Strikes Back sitting on deck because I'm working through the movies leading into Rogue One. So I've been watching all the films, but I'm jumping all around. Like I watched The Phantom Menace the other day, and I'm probably going to watch Empire Strikes Back sometime this weekend if I get through the commentary for 7. So I'm kind of bouncing all over the place as opposed to following them in order. But when it was snowing outside, I was reminded of Hoth and how much as a kid going to the snow was like, hey, I'm on Hoth. The Forest of Endor. We were, no joke, I was on a bike ride with my 9-year-old about a month and a half ago, and there's this trail. There's actually a state park that's not too far from where we live, and there's this really great bike trail on it. There's horse trails too, but there's this really great bike trail on it. And on this bike trail, there's these tall trees, and there's some parts of it where there's slight inclines and turns, and so if you get some speed going, you can kind of zip through this trail. It's really fun. And we're riding, and Kyle goes, "Hey, Dad, it's like the speeder bikes on Endor in Return of the Jedi." And again, it's that relatability factor. On top of the popularity of the movies themselves, because of the limitations, and I believe that's the reason why, without knowing for sure, but because of the limitations that George Lucas was under in having to make these singular climate planets, but also having to stick to that which he could go and film on Earthbound, because he didn't have the technology to go and make things crazy looking like he did in the prequel trilogy. It ended up creating, again, more of that relatability and more ways to bring in Star Wars into your regular lives apart from watching the films that I firmly believe increased its popularity. I also think the prequels suffered because of that. Now, granted, there's only so many different climates that you can visit. And, The Force Awakens kind of cheated because they did all three. So, they did the Kadar, right? Was that what it was? Kadar, which was where the Rebel base was, which was kind of a jungle planet, which wasn't all that unlike Yavin was in A New Hope, or what we'll see in Rogue One. And then you had Starkiller Base, which was kind of your snow planet, so you had your Hoth. And then Jakku, which was kind of just like Tatooine, and that was all the point, right? But again, in the prequel movies, you didn't really have that. I mean, you had Naboo, all right. So, Naboo's climate, kind of. It's kind of a forest. It's a forest planet, but it's a little bit different than Endor. It's a little more Kansas, a little less, redwood forest, right, with the rolling hills. But then what do you have? Coruscant. Well, there really isn't a place like that unless you look at like New York, maybe. But even then, it doesn't really have that relatability factor to it. Geonosis, well, no, you don't really have that either. Certainly don't have Mustafar unless you're in Hawaii and happen to be standing on a volcano. So, again, not saying that it diminishes my enjoyment of those films, but I am saying that I think there's something to be said that because of the lack of relatability, that those movies also didn't connect in the same way the original trilogy did. And that can be said beyond locations too, right? I mean, if we're talking about those three films, you're also talking about what essentially broke down to superhero movies, because the Jedi were kind of superheroes. They could kind of do anything and kind of jump everywhere. And I don't have a problem with that, again, but when you look at A New Hope had the Force very grounded, and you didn't see Luke going to the extent of what you saw the Jedi do in the prequel trilogy, but that was limitations, solely because George couldn't do that. He was limited on wire work. Does not diminish my enjoyment of those prequels in any way, shape, or form, but it does speak to the lack of the relatability that the original trilogy had, and that what J.J. Abrams did in Episode 7. Now, the big question is, and I spent another podcast talking about this because I still firmly believe that Disney's biggest gamble is going to be Episode 8. But from everything we're hearing about Episode 8, it is probably going to be very close to what the prequels were. And I hope that's the case. I hope if J.J. Abrams used The Force Awakens to bring the fans back in, to touch us in our nostalgic feels while giving us a batch of new characters that we could all fall in love with, and making it relatable to a new generation, then fantastic. Then I hope that Rian Johnson takes it the next step, does that, but also harkens back to the prequel trilogy in style and perhaps aesthetic to have those movies feel fuller together as a 9-part saga, than making it a close cousin to The Empire Strikes Back, the way that The Force Awakens was essentially the sister to A New Hope. And we're seeing some information leak out about that. Rian Johnson has not hidden the fact that he is a prequel fan. He likes the prequels and thought those were beautiful films. We're getting some descriptions of characters from Episode 8, and it would appear that their design, and people have said this, their design is getting a little bit closer to what we saw in the prequels, a little bit less than what we saw in the original trilogy. And quite honestly, all of the leaked photos that took place over, was that the beginning of the year? I guess it was probably over the winter at the beginning of the year when they shot the film. Might have been spring, but there were all those leaked films from where was the shoot at? Estonia? Were they in Estonia? Dubrovnik. Sure, they were in one of those places. All of the behind the scenes photos that look like it was lifted directly from a prequel film. including some of the speeders we saw, the way that people were dressed. So, I think that episode 8, and everybody seems to agree on that. Most of the other podcasts I